Hey, I'm Jeff Rona, and my new album, Projector, is coming out. One of the real amazing key elements of the process of making Projector was this gentleman to my right, Peter Gregson. Projector started off as a series of experiments where, using very little synth, very few samples, almost none, but dealing with processed sounds and building rhythms and textures and harmonies, I wrote a whole suite of ideas, but they were just ideas. And you showed up, kind of, I don't even know how. What was really fun for me was you came by, you said, let me hear something, and I played you something. And you said, stop. I said, what's wrong? I thought you didn't like the music. But actually you said, hit record. And off you went. It suddenly just took a whole new direction. Do you remember?
I do, and I think it's so important to capture that kind of immediacy of it, you know, and really try and not know what's happening next, not know what's on the next page, not know what's coming. And so you always end up with this kind of heightened sense of awareness that when you're listening, you're thinking, well, you don't know where it's going, but you, in time, you know, certainly on the first track, you don't know what you're doing, but as it develops through, you know, whatever, 4 or 5 tracks, I can't remember how many we did on that afternoon, but you kind of get into the language of it, and you start not predict it, but you can see where it's going and how it's getting there.
And so there was this back and forth where, as I was continuing to develop the rhythms and all of the other musical elements, you were off in your lair on your island, not my lair on my island, saying, oh, I get it. And you would take this kind of gem, this beautiful idea. It got more and more organic. And yet it always started with that thing that was kind of a surprise.
You then cut it down into shapes. You put it in places and do things and say, oh, now have at it and try it again. It's kind of a fascinating process. And so that raw kind of immediacy is so valuable to these sorts of projects, to try and not overthink what you're doing and not over-edit, over-analyse. You know, I think I remember on 1 or 2 of them that there would be large stretches of silence. And you think, well, normally if you're doing a kind of remote session recording, that's not really an option. You kind of have to send in as much as you've got, because, you know, it's like a pair of trousers. You don't want to buy a pair of trousers that are short and then try and get them made long. You want to buy them long and have them taken in. But I think with something like Project, we got to a point where there was that understanding of what it was doing, where it was going, and it was about kind of polishing it rather than structurally necessarily changing things, or, you know, it was about making it feel more and more organic and more innocent and naive, I guess.
You know, I'm so used to the idea of sitting down to write a piece of music in which it begins with a goal. And the goal could be an emotion or a lyric.
Or a time code reference.
Or a time, since, you know, we both swim in the world of film music, and this is so different than that, in that it was, for me, really refreshing to not have a goal other than every day was a day of discovery. It was really as though these tracks sort of revealed themselves slowly through my own manipulation of sound. In most of the tracks on the album, no synthesizers, no samples. With you and with David Julian playing guitars, and there's a couple other guitar players, you know, all of these elements that came, and I was never sure at first, is this going to work? And if so, what is it real? You know, is it going to take me down some sort of musical dark alley? But, you know, I think once you're halfway there, it starts to kind of illuminate. And then it gets closer and closer and closer. So this, I think, is very much an album that comes more from process. And you were very much part of that process of me sending you something and going, I only want you to play a little tiny bit, but do something quite, you know, unexpected and magical. And, well, actually, the great thing about working with you is nobody has to talk to you. I kind of love that.
That works best for everybody, I think.
I mean, I don't even know how you talk about music half the time, you know? I mean, you can talk about, you know, tonalities and, you know, use all the fancy Italian words. But this was an album that has absolutely none of that kind of formality or structure, even though it does have rhythm and beat, and it does have some of what feels like the conventions of other styles of music. This happened in an entirely different way, and I loved how, without me telling you anything, your musicianship just sort of, you do what you do really well, you know? And I wish I did. You know, I don't really play an instrument per se, but you know, I fiddle on keys and I've fiddled on woodwinds my whole life, right? But you have, I think maybe because you're much more of a performer than I am, you I think approached it more like a performance than as a composition, whereas I continue to swim in the waters of, well, I'm a composer. I guess I better compose something. I mean, the one thing I've learned as an electronic musician is the idea of sound as a form of inspiration, as opposed to other elements in life, whether it's lyrics to a song or a plot of a film. That sound itself can be very inspiring. You know, certainly with synthesizers, you come up with something, it's a bit of a happy accident, and you go, well, isn't that really a great sound when I do this?
Yeah, exactly.
And so this whole album kind of starts with this idea of taking found sounds. I used sounds from the Amazon rainforest, I used radio transmissions, I used some musical instruments, but everything got highly processed. And actually, the more I got inspired by all of these elements coming sort of in the air, you became one of those elements, because as I sent you things, you came back with things that I thought, this is amazing. Let me try something. And I took your improvisations and your reaction to me, and then I became reactive to you, so that some of the sound bending toys and techniques that I, in some cases, came up with only for this album, you became kind of part of that. But I never would have thought of them if you hadn't done what you do. And you seem to approach it both as a performer and as a composer. If one thinks of them as kind of separate, I think they are, in a way, different elements. And it's not just being in sort of real time. There's a thought process of, where am I going to go next?
It's much more like a conversation. It's far more about listening and then thinking next. In music, you might have consonance, you might have dissonance, you might have harmonic consonance or rhythmic consonance, or rhythmic dissonance, rhythmic consonance. And I think they're all valid avenues of that kind of conversation. You've got to be open to the possibility that silence is an option. And you've got to be open to the fact that silence is often preferable.
I'm very used to this kind of thoughtful, sometimes fairly slow process of experimenting until the happy accident and then saying, what can I do with this moment? What you do, though, is your thinking is really fast. It's what I love and sort of admire in like an electric guitar player, that they just plug in and they just bang. It's instantaneous. It's as fast as you move your hand. So many of your first takes are in the album. It's like ridiculous. And it's that ability, which I don't have, of being able to do things that rapidly, because you're quite virtuosic, and you can, because you're playing with this instrument it's a physical instrument. I'm just, twiddling knobs and flipping, things on screens.
Some of these cables are really difficult to plug in.
They can be at times. Sometimes you have to clean them up.